Hi everyone. So I'm super excited for this. This is the first episode of the podcast series Lecture Halls to Success Stories. And the guest that we have today with us is one of my college seniors, Guna Shekar. I've personally had the opportunity to work with him for quite a long time, and I've had so much learning experience working with him, not just in terms of tech but in terms of life as well. And he's definitely someone who I look up to whenever I need an answer, or whenever I'm in a situation where I'm supposed to decide between two things. He's someone who I always look up to and always take an opinion from, and I'm really glad that he is here as the first guest of this podcast series. So we'll get directly to the podcast series, but before that, I'll just give you a brief intro about him. So obviously, he's an exceptional tech guy, and he's currently working as the founding engineer at KoinX for more than an year. And you'll get to know a lot about him more in the podcast that we have today. So make sure to stay till the very end of the video, and I hope that this podcast acts helpful to you. So thank you, and I'll switch to the podcast now.
Hi Kunal, hi everyone.
Hi, Guna. Thank you for agreeing to join this particular podcast.
No, it's my pleasure.
Guna, could you share a bit about your journey in the tech industry so far, your educational background, and any previous experiences that have shaped your career in general?
Sure. So I think my relationship with tech developed way back in school. So thanks to my school's curriculum, I had computer science related subjects right from sixth, seventh standard, and then eventually I took up computer science in 12th grade as well, and then got into college and also pursued my bachelor's in computer science from the Indian Institute of Information Technology in Gwalior. So yeah, so the whole journey was computer science all along. And yep, after joining college is when I started to discover real world use cases of what I can do with tech. So I delved into different fields like mobile development, web development, blockchain, etc. And thankfully, very early in my college days itself, I think in the beginning of my second year, I started to intern with a company called Zubi, and that is when I think my career really took off in engineering space. Uh, After that, I went on to work with some fellowships like MLH Fellowship, Tezos India Fellowship, etc. And in my pre-final year internship, I worked with Stripe Singapore, and in my eighth semester, that is when I started building KoinX, and it has been a year and a half so far.
Amazing. Quite a lot of achievements, I see. So let's dive deeper into your current role. Tell us more about the company you're currently working at and your day to day activities within the company.
Sure. So, firstly, about the company, KoinX is a crypto tax and accounting software. So, simply put, people trade in cryptocurrencies. They buy and sell cryptocurrencies, and they make profits or losses. And at the end of the day, they have to report these gains to the government. So, even if they make losses, right? If they make profits or losses, they have to report these gains to the government. So, according to the latest rules that are released by either the Indian government or governments abroad, it is very difficult for an individual investor to calculate those gains manually or using simple tools like Excel and submit it to the government in the format that they want. So that becomes a very complicated process, and in most cases, practically impossible, especially in India. So that is what we do. We help users ease in that process where they can simply just integrate their accounts of various exchanges, blockchains, or wallets, and we collect their transactions, process them, and give them ready to use ITR ready reports. They just have to download a report from us and upload it on the ITR portal. So that is how seamless we want to make tax reporting when it comes to cryptocurrencies. So that is what CoinX does. Now about what I do. So as I said, I take care of technology and engineering at CoinX. So on paper, my role is something else. It's a very senior sounding position, but I don't think I'm there yet. I feel I'm pretty inexperienced and young to be there. So that is why I just call myself as the caretaker of engineering at CoinX. So yeah, that's my role. And what I do, so I do quite a few things because this is a startup and you have to wear multiple hats.
Right.
So out of them, I can break it down into parts. So the first thing I would say is managing the team. So I manage a team of 10 to 15 engineers, um, assigning tasks to them, deciding on who works on what, and pairing with them and brainstorming and thinking about how we are going to achieve what we want to achieve, things like that. Second is, I would say, the role of an architect. So I design systems, of course, along with other engineers. I design the systems and uh, play an important role in how things will scale and how we are going to implement our systems so that they achieve their maximum efficiency, things like that. Uh, Third role would be that of a coder. I also code, so I do take on tasks and projects myself. So I keep coding as well. Uh, Another one, it's not really a role per se, but then when you're leading engineering, so you also become a POC for other teams, right? So
Right.
anyone in the company, they have to do anything with technology. They consult you, and you have to cater to their needs. So that is another thing. But yeah, overall, it's managing as in deciding work and PR reviews and stuff like that. Then coding, then architecture, and then POC. This is what I do.
So I can already see that you're like involved in a lot of activities within the company itself, and you're taking care of a lot of things. So working at an early age startup does seem very exciting from my point of view. I think we'll come back to this question at some later point in the podcast as well. But continuing forward, was this aspiration of becoming an engineer always there, or were you like, did you want to become something else during your school time?
No, I mean, that would depend on how long ago we go. Like, if you asked me what I wanted to become in my second grade, then I probably would have said cricketer. So
Right.
that is a different age altogether. But yeah, for the longest time, I have wanted to become an engineer. I think
Right.
from seventh, eighth standard. I think my family plays a big role in that. My brother is also an engineer, and he's 7 years elder to me. So I watched him become an engineer even when I was in school. So yep, that is how it came to be.
Right. So moving ahead, I have done a bit of research around you and your previous experiences as well. And as you also said that you have interned at Stripe, you had the opportunity to work with Stripe, which is basically a company that a lot of tech professionals dream to work with. Could you share some learnings from your time at Stripe and briefly describe your interview experience there? And also for everyone who's trying to aim Stripe, can you share some resources that they can follow to crack the interviews at Stripe?
Right, makes sense. So, firstly, about my experience at Stripe, it was extremely enriching. So, I got to learn a lot of things, even though I was just there for 3 months as an intern.
Right.
Experiencing a multinational company for the first time is a wonderful experience in its own. So, I had a wonderful manager. I had a wonderful manager's manager. So, they taught me a lot of things and gave me a lot of resources on how I can get started and how to become a better engineer in general.
Right.
So right from day one, I was involved in production activities. I worked on compliance issues. I worked on improving efficiency of the product itself. I was in the cards team, so I was working closely with card networks and how we can improve our system so that our integration is better, things like that. So I was given a lot of responsibility and a lot of help, thankfully. So I think that was one of the more enriching and learning experiences, I would say, in my career. So yep, the experience was wonderful.
So coming to the interview part, I would say Stripe is one of those companies that looks at hiring good engineers and not just coders or people who can sit in a room and write code and develop things. So their in interview processes are also tailored towards that goal. So the problems that you get in your interviews are very real world problems, and those problems are very similar to the kind of problems that you would actually solve, when you work at Stripe. So I didn't realize this before, but after I got into Stripe and did the work, I actually understood that the whole interview process is tailored in such a way that uh, it's exactly according to what they need. So your interview and your work won't be disconnected. You will be hired for the kind of things that you would actually do when you work at Stripe. Coming to if you want tips on how to clear the stripes interview, I would say those problems are very real world problems, right? So you don't really have to remember a lot of data structures and algorithms or stuff like that. You just have to calmly think about the problem and think about how you can solve that particular use case and ensure how you can get the code to work. So one thing I've realized with experience over there is that they really care about the working of the product. It might not be the best solution because even they understand that you have 60 minutes to solve a problem. So thinking about the best solution on track and on the spot and building it right away, they understand that it's not practically possible all the time. So it's okay if you don't build the best solution out there, but you must be at least able to think of a solution and build it. So speed and accuracy, I would say, plays an important role in Stripe's interview. You have to be quick, and it's okay if you don't build the most efficient system, but you have to be able to build a system, and you have to be able to solve the problem, even though it is in a slightly inefficient way. You can, of course, discuss pros and cons and how you can improve it later on at the end of the interview. So, yep, these would be my tips for the interview. And if you're looking for any resources to practice problems that you would ideally face at a Stripe interview, one resource that I found very useful was Lead Code's design section, where there are problems like developing a mini Twitter or a mini Airbnb, things like that. Uh, so yep, that can be a pretty useful tool if you want to prepare for such interviews.
Right. So for everyone who's looking forward to a Stripe interview in the near future, speed and accuracy are your key. And find a solution. Don't look at optimizing things. Right. If I summed it up correctly, I think that is what the gist is. Right.
Yep. So just go ahead and build a solution. You can always optimize it later. You can discuss with the interview and things like that.
Right, makes sense. Also, the resource mentioned by Guna, I'll drop a link to that in the description section of the video below, so you can go directly solve those kinds of problem on lead code as well. Moving on to the next question. I from my research, I also know that you got a PPO from Stripe as well, and that is quite remarkable. But you still chose to join an early age startup, KoinX. I mean, personally, this does seem like a very tough decision because if it would have been me, I I would have chosen Stripe right away because Stripe does pay you well. It has a good work-life balance. It has a good company culture in general. But you still went ahead and chose an early age startup. So, what all things went behind your head, and what was the thought process to come to that decision?
So yeah, you're right when you say that Stripe pays well. It's probably one of the highest paying firms in the world, apart from high frequency trading firms maybe. It does have a great work life balance. I was during my internship, I was working on important projects, but I was enjoying the work, and I never really had work pressure as such. So yeah, it was really nice. But I still chose to join CoinX. But this wasn't a decision that I took from day zero, though. The day zero from when I started building CoinX. So I think CoinX journey started in February of 2022 when Puneet, who's the founder of CoinX, called me and told me this idea and what he wants to build. So that is when I joined him, and then we started building the product. But at that point of time, I wasn't really looking at staying long term in the company and becoming a very key member of the founding team and things like that. I had some time, and this was an interesting engineering problem to solve. So
Right.
that is why I said yes. Then it got started. But then after a point, when I was about to graduate, I had to make a decision if I wanted to, continue with CoinX or go with Stripe. So that is when I took into consideration a few things in order to make that decision, right? So firstly, I looked at my, financial responsibilities and dependence. So thankfully, I come from a pretty decently well-off family. So my mom and dad both work. I have a elder brother who also works. So I am really grateful to having that in my life. So I think that is the major reason why I was able to take the decision that I took. So thankfully, I did not have any liabilities as such financially. So uh, I was okay with going for an early stage startup, taking a pay cut, uh, and risking my job as such. Even if my job was lost tomorrow, that wouldn't really impact me or my family a lot. So
Right.
that was one thing. Then wealth creation, right? So uh, not having financial responsibilities is one thing, but securing your financial future is another thing. So one thing is, if I went ahead with Stripe, I would have earned good amount of money, right? Pretty good amount of money, because it was a Singapore offer. I could be saving a lot more than I do here. But then maybe I would have to work for 10 to 15 years to be able to retire from tech, in case I wanted to. Not that I do want to,
Right.
but yeah, I would have to work for 10 to 15 years to save enough money to and come back to India, of course, uh, and retire. But if I join the startup and the startup succeeds, I have enough stake in the company so that I can retire pretty early. So it's not very uncommon to see 2x, 10x, 20x, 50x growths in startup within a few years, right? Maybe 4 to 5 years. At many times too. So if I took this bet, I would become much more wealthy in a much less amount of time, given that the startup succeeds. I know that the probability of a startup succeeding is pretty less when you consider the statistics. But again, I had confidence in the product and in what we were doing. So that was another aspect. So on the downside, I would just lose my job and I'll probably go looking for another job and I'll have to work for 5 extra years to achieve
Yeah.
that state. But on the plus side, I would have achieved a lot more money in a lot less time. So that was a bet worth taking. So yeah, I mean, this was the finances side, but there were other non-financial things as well that I took into consideration while making this decision. Firstly, I would say founder. So Puneet is the founder of KoinX. I also worked with Puneet previously at another company, Zubi. That is the first company that I ever interned at. I had a great experience there, and I stayed in touch with Puneet ever since, right from my second year. And I know the kind of business acumen he has, the kind of leadership vision that he has, and I knew that if he's into something, then he's not just making a fool of investors, taking their money and going to run away. I knew that he's here to build a product and he wants to do something big. So
Right.
I had a very big bet on the founder as well. So that's another thing. Uh, Next, I would say learning opportunities and growth. So I wouldn't say that you won't get to learn anything at an MNC. You do get to learn a lot. Having worked at Stripe for 3 months, I did get to learn a lot of things over there as well. But it's a different kind of learning experience when you're building a startup on your own. So you do everything from the scratch, right? You set up the event queue, you set up feature flags, you set up tests, and everything from the scratch. Whereas in an MNC, you would probably have a class, you import it, you say event queue.publish, and then everything is done. But here you
Right.
set up everything from the scratch, the infrastructure, how the system should be architected so that all your components are talking well to each other, things like that. So the learning aspect with respect to tech is very different from probably what you would get at an MNC. And system design as a whole, right? You're designing the whole system from the scratch, not just the engineering part, but also the product part. So thinking about since we are into taxes, how our code will be complying to government standards, things like that. You have to take care of a lot of things. So that's a very interesting aspect in this role. And growth too. So since you're working at an early stage startup, you have to do everything on your own. So the pace at which you grow is much faster, I would think. Uh, so yeah, that was also one of the pros, I would say, for joining the startup. Uh, Finally, work-life balance. I would say at Stripe, I would obviously have a much better work-life balance. Over here, since I'm doing a lot of stuff, I have to give up a little on work-life balance. Not that I would, sit in front of a laptop 18 hours a day and just code, but I do get some time to do other things as well. But yeah, it's definitely not as good. The work-life balance is not as good as what you would get at an MNC. But then that
Right.
was a sacrifice I was willing to make at this stage of my career. So, yep, that is another thing. Finally, I mean, I already discussed about financials, but also job security, right? So at an MNC, like I can't say this now because even Stripe went
Yeah.
through layoffs and many other
Yes.
MNCs also went through layoffs. But it's general perception that bigger companies are generally
Secure.
offer you more job security.
Yeah.
Whereas in a startup, you never know, right? We can go to zero tomorrow. So that was an issue, but that was a risk I was willing to take, given the benefits I was getting. So yeah, I think these are the overall these are the things that I considered while making that decision.
Makes sense. And I think from an individual's perspective, keeping your decision apart, I think that was quite an exceptional way to look at things and compare both of your choices. It was amazing how you took into consideration all the options you had and basically decided on where you wanted to proceed with. So yeah, amazing thing there. So moving ahead, choosing between a startup and a multinational corporation ultimately comes down to personal preferences, right? So someone might prefer a big MNC, someone might prefer working at a startup. And from your answer, I think you have had like immense amount of learning while working at KoinX. As you said, you were building systems from the very scratch and not just directly using the functions or directly just working on code. You built all of that from scratch itself. So if you were to have that choice again, now that you've worked both at Stripe and at CoinX for more than a year, if you were to make that choice again, will you still go with an early age startup? And if yes, do you think there are like some distinct learnings while working at an early age startup? You become an better engineer overall. You start to look at things from a product point of view. Do you think all of these things add up to your decision of working at an early age startup?
Yeah, you're absolutely right when you say that, it comes down to personal preferences, right? So even in my previous answer, I used a lot of I and my choice of doing this. So it was according to my situation, right? So I cannot generalize that you should do a startup, you should work in a startup, or you should work in an MNC. It totally comes down to your personal situation and preferences.
Right.
Uh, but yeah, coming to the follow-up questions about is there any distinct learning that you would get at a startup and not an MNC? I would say the privilege of wearing many hats is something you would get at a startup. So here I'm not just an engineer, right? So I also take a look at product. I do user research. I talk to a lot of customers directly, understand their pain points, try to tailor our systems according to their pain points. Marketing, I get to share my opinions in how you can market a certain part of our product, and give opinions on why this feature is very good and why it will be useful to users. I even recorded some videos for the marketing team by explaining the features so that it's easier for users. Things like that. And also working very closely with the founder, I got to learn a lot about how a company runs and all the financials that go behind it, all the audit processes that you have to do, and things like that. So yeah, like one advantage you certainly get at a startup is that you get a very holistic experience as an employee, and not just as an engineer, I would say.
So yeah, thank you for that answer. I think everyone who's looking to decide between an early age startup or an MNC would definitely help from that answer. Right. So last question for this particular podcast. If there's any advice that you would want to give to any of your juniors or any upcoming tech professionals, what would it be?
Right. So, like one advice I would give is take all advices with a pinch of salt. Do not blindly listen to anyone on the internet or any of your anyone who gives you advices. A lot of the people will give you a lot of advices, but many a times people forget that their advices are coming from a point of their life, right? So
Right.
they're giving you advices based on what worked for them, but that might not necessarily work for you. So yep, that's my advice. Take advices with a pinch of salt. Think about why they're giving that advice and whether that advice will suit you or not, and then follow that advice. And my
Awesome.
advice from my perspective would be
Yeah.
play the long game. Uh, Always think long term, and you're not in this for 1 year or 2 years. You're going to survive for a few years, hopefully. So yeah, play the long game and think long term.
Right. I think that is quite an awesome advice from your end. That brings us to the very end of the first episode of this podcast series, Lecture Halls to Success Stories. I will mention all the social media handles of Guna in the description below. You can go follow him on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and everywhere he is. I'll mark all of those in the description below. And do reach out to him for any guidance or tips. If you're interviewing at Stripe, then do ping him. And for anything in general, just ping him, and I am sure he will respond. So yeah, and for any future podcast episodes like this, do follow us and for subscribe to the channel. Hit that like button if you like the podcast, and all my social handles are also there in the description below. I really hope that this podcast was in general helpful to you. Thank you so much, Guna, for coming on to the podcast and helping everyone out and telling us about your career in general and your experiences. It was really helpful.
Yep, thank you so much for having me here. It's been a pleasure.
All right then. So if you stayed till this point, thank you so much for watching the entire video. And please make sure to hit that like button if you like the content, if you like the video and got to learn something from Guna's experience. I'll keep bringing these sort of podcasts every week. I'll try to. And do hit the subscribe button if you want to keep a track of all those podcasts. And I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for watching.